The African Center for Economic Transformation has recently launched a Visiting Scholars Program, which welcomes scholars from around the world who have a special expertise in economic development and particular experience in African countries to come to our center in Accra and spend time with our researchers, sharing insights, honing research focal points, and expanding their networks and ours on economic development and transformation issues. In this session, we're very happy to welcome Professor Douglas Gollin, who comes with a wealth of experience in development economics. He's a professor at St. Anthony's College in Oxford, and he has particular interest in agriculture and technology.
Well, I always enjoy coming back to Accra and coming back to Ghana. As you know, the first time I came here was in 1988, and the changes that have taken place in that time are so amazing. The things that have not changed, though, are the warmth of the people, and Ghana is still a wonderful country to visit and to spend time in. So for me, it's a great pleasure to be back. What brought me to ACET was the opportunity to spend some time based in Ghana, working in a research institution that's focused on development issues across Africa. That's a very exciting opportunity for me. It's one thing to study development and to talk about economic transformation when you're sitting in the US or in the UK, but the issues become much more real when you're sitting in Accra and you look outside the window every day or you walk through the streets of Osu and you see what's going on. So for me, to be based in Africa while I'm doing research is really valuable. I think agriculture has an important role to play in economy-wide transformation. And I think the economy-wide transformations of African countries must necessarily involve agriculture. For starters, 2/3 of the people in sub-Saharan Africa are on farms, living in rural areas. In some countries, 80, even 90% of the people are in rural areas. So necessarily, any kind of economy-wide transformation will change the face of agriculture. And I think agriculture, although it's long been viewed as a relatively low potential sector, agriculture can contribute to export earnings. We all know that the traditional exports like coffee and cocoa are there and will continue to be important for Africa. But increasingly, we've seen many countries in sub-Saharan Africa participating in the export of non-traditional agricultural crops. So fruits and vegetables, cut flowers, many other things. And I think increasingly we will also see those horticultural sectors in Africa contributing to an agri-processing sector. This has happened in many places in Southeast Asia, in Thailand and in Indonesia. Some of the first industries that took hold as these countries began to grow were agri-processing industries, canning pineapple, producing juices, producing factory-based production of agricultural goods. And I don't see any reason why that shouldn't be a part of the initial economic transformation in many African countries. Agricultural transformation, I think as we generally understand it, would be the process through which agriculture becomes less subsistence-oriented, more market-oriented. Another dimension would be probably some kind of consolidation of farm size, a movement from very small farms on which people are primarily producing for their own food, and to larger farms, perhaps more professionally managed. Still, they will be family farms. In almost all of the world, farming is dominated by family management units, but they would be larger, aimed at both local and international markets, and probably somewhat more specialized. The other dimension is the macroeconomic contribution of agriculture to economy-wide transformation. And I think part of what we hope to see from agriculture in the transformation process is an increase in productivity and an increase in the contribution of agriculture to other sectors in the economy. What we've had over the past 10 or 20 or really 50 years in agriculture in much of sub-Saharan Africa is very little growth in productivity. We see farms that look very much like they did half a century ago. Increasing the productivity at the farm level will be important, and then having an agricultural sector that can feed into an agricultural processing sector that can generate good opportunities for transport, that creates wealth in rural areas and leads to investment in hotels and restaurants, in other economic activities in rural areas. To me, that's the other piece of agricultural transformation. Agricultural transformation has proved elusive in part because we've had surprisingly low investment in the agricultural sector from governments. Until recently, certainly going back to the 1960s and 70s, governments focused much of their attention on the industrial sector and thought that transformation could only occur from modern industrial structures. And so I think for a long time there was quite a lot of neglect of the agricultural sector. It was seen as a backward area, and so moving investments into more favorable, more modern sectors was seen as the strategy. I don't think we fully appreciated, and I include all of us in development economics, until about 15 or 20 years ago, how important the agricultural sector was for overall economic growth. Beyond that, I think it's been very slow actually to develop improved technologies, crop varieties, other agricultural technologies that were well adapted to African settings. Beginning in the 1960s and 70s, many of the efforts to improve agricultural productivity in Africa were trying to take technologies from North America, from Europe, from Asia, from the Asian Green Revolution, and simply apply those in Africa. But the conditions here are very different. The farm structures are quite different, and many of the challenges faced by farmers in Africa are different from they are in Latin America or Asia or the countries of Europe and North America. To give a concrete example, fertilizer use in much of sub-Saharan Africa is very low. We see farmers using no fertilizer or very small amounts compared with farmers in developing Asia or developing Latin America. And this is a reflection of the prices that they pay for transportation of fertilizer going into the farm, and also the costs that they pay for transporting crops from the farm gate to market. When those transport costs are very high, fertilizer is not very profitable. And so farmers use small amounts and they use it on the highest value crops that they produce. Understanding that raises challenges for agricultural research. It means we need to be thinking about developing crop varieties which grow well with low inputs of chemicals. So these kinds of things have taken a long time for us to understand, and I think we're only now starting to see the research that will create the potential for agricultural transformation and the policy understanding that will allow for transformation. An agricultural transformation here in Africa will involve a movement of some people out of rural areas and out of agriculture into other sectors. Not necessarily everybody leaving rural areas for the capital cities, but there will be some movement of people out of agriculture, so a development of agricultural markets. And I think we'll see longer supply chains of food and agriculture markets as farmers are selling to urban consumers. In urban areas, we see people who like to consume animal products, meat and dairy. We see urban consumers who, in general, consume more oils and fats and sugars and processed foods. Urban life everywhere in the world is very busy. People don't have much time to spend pounding cassava, for example. And so we see urban consumers preferring convenience foods, prepared foods, things that they can consume with very little preparation time. And that will change in turn what the markets look like that face farmers in much of sub-Saharan Africa. This process is already starting. You see it to some extent in East Africa with the emergence of active dairy industries outside of Nairobi, outside of Kampala. You'll see the same thing spreading elsewhere in East and Southern Africa. Animal agriculture is a little more complicated in West Africa, but the same kind of movement into prepared and processed foods and high-value foods will take place. I think it's enormously important to have an institution like ACET that's based in Africa, that is working across the continent to try to reach policymakers and to promote economic transformation. You know, there are institutions in Washington, D.C., there's the World Bank, there are institutions in the global north, let's say, which think about economic transformation. But it's always hard for policymakers in Africa to understand whether the motivations of those institutions are fully aligned with the interests of African countries, African people. I think for an African institution to be taking on this work and to be focusing on the issues of economic transformation as ACET is enormously important. An institution like ACET has great credibility with African governments and policymakers, and it also offers a forum for African researchers and researchers like myself who are willing to be based in Africa for some time. It gives us a place to do research where we don't feel that it's fulfilling the mission of some other governments or some other institutions. We feel comfortable that this work will be treated seriously and will be taken as independent, will be taken as work that serves the interests of African governments and African people. And so I think it's very important to have an institution like ACET that's based here, that's bringing terrific young researchers and scholars to work on these issues, and that's providing them with the support and the connections that they need to bridge the gap between academic research and policymakers. So I think ACET's role is very important. I'm really excited to be a part of this and to have the opportunity to visit ACET. And I'm told that I'm the first of what will, I hope, be a series of external visitors who can come to participate in this work.